Hi again, grade 5. This is our third video about the skeletal system, and it's the last one. I hope you liked the skeletal system. In the first video, we talked about the 5 functions of the skeletal system and about bones, ligaments, and cartilage. In the second video, we talked about the names of bones around your body, and in this video, we're going to discuss the kinds of joints. So I'm going to explain to you what are joints and what are the kinds of joints in your body. Okay, so what is a joint? A joint is a place where two bones meet. Of course, you know your body is made up of many bones, and when two bones come together, the space between two bones, we call this a joint. Okay? So a joint, it's the place where two bones come together. Now you already know that we have cartilage at a joint to keep the bones from rubbing, and we have ligaments at a joint to join the bones together. Okay, so that's very important to know that at a joint we need to have ligaments and cartilage. So why do you need to have joints, and what is the job of joints in your body? Of course, they help your body to move, and they give you your flexibility. The more you train, the more flexible you will be. Of course, flexibility needs a lot of training, like ballerinas and those that play gymnastics. It takes a lot of practice to be flexible, to train your joints to be flexible. Now, so it's very, very important to know that joints, they allow you to move, or else you would be just like a block, a piece of block, nothing, just one whole piece. But of course, we're not one whole piece. We can easily bend and twist and move because of these joints. So in a human body, we almost have 360 joints in our body. So that makes us, of course, very flexible. We have many joints in our backbone. That's why we can bend in between each vertebra. We have many joints in our fingers. That's why we have several joints in each finger. Okay, that's why we are able to bend. Try bending your fingers. Try bending your back. That's because you have so many joints there. So we have two kinds of joints in our body. We have movable joints, those joints that can move, and of course we have immovable or fixed joints. They're joints that don't move. Remember, I told you last time that your skull is not one whole piece and your pelvis is not one whole piece. They're actually pieces of bones that fit together, much like a puzzle. So the space between those two bones, like for example in your skull, as you can see in the picture, these are called joints. But these joints are different because they're fixed. You can't move them. So of course not all joints move, okay? We do have immovable joints. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about the 4 kinds of movable joints, okay? Number 1, the hinge. Number 2, the pivot. Number 3, ball and socket. And number 4, gliding joints. Now, how do you think each joint is different from the other? They're movable joints. Joints allow us to move. But what makes each one different from the other is what kind of movement they allow us to do. So, joints are different in the kind of movement, how they allow us to move. Do they allow a circular movement? Do they allow a left and right twisting movement? Do they allow an up and down movement? Do they allow a sliding movement? So every joint is different because it allows a different kind of movement. I'm going to start with the hinge joint. The hinge joint is the one we use most often, like when you want to pick up your pencil, or when you want to hold the paper, or put something down on your desk, or when you want to raise your hand in class. Okay, hinge joints, they're found in your elbow. Your elbow is the space between your upper arm and your lower arm, and in your knee. Your knee is the space between your upper leg and your lower leg. So you have hinge joints in your elbow and in your knee. Okay, as I said, your elbow is between your upper and lower arm. Now, the hinge joint allows a back and forth movement. Okay, so it allows you to swing your arm, your lower arm back and forth, and to swing your lower leg back and forth. Now we're going to see some examples. So as you can see here, when someone is kicking the ball, they're using a hinge joint in their knee. Or when someone is shooting the basketball through the hoop, they're using the hinge joint in their elbow to move their arm up and down. Or like when we're picking something up and throwing it in the trash, this means we're using our elbow, the hinge in our elbows. So a hinge joint allows a back and forth movement. It's found in your elbow and in your knee. The second kind of movable joint is the pivot joint. A pivot joint allows you to move side to side. It allows like a rotation, a side to side or left and right rotation. We find it in our neck, like when you shake your head to say no to someone. That's a rotation movement. That's a side to side movement. That means you have a pivot in your neck. And also you have it in your lower arm, in between your radius and ulna. For example, imagine that you're opening like a jar of Nutella. Okay, imagine that. So when you twist, with that twisting movement do that right now, and you can see that you're twisting your radius and ulna because you have a pivot in your lower arm. Okay, you're not twisting your wrist, you're really twisting the radius and ulna because you have a pivot there. So a pivot joint allows a twisting movement or a left and right movement. It allows us to twist things like when I want to open a jar, or when I want to say like what to someone with my hand, make a hand gesture of what. That means I'm using the pivot, or shaking my neck side to side. So here we can see these two boys using their pivots. He's trying to open a jar, and the other boy is shaking his head side to side. These are examples of us using pivot joints in our neck and in our lower arm. The third kind of movable joint is the ball and socket. It's like, why is it called a ball and socket? Because there's like a ball that's fitting into a socket. A socket is a hole. Like if you've ever played with a Barbie or a doll, you can see that at the end of their arm they have like a ball, and then there's a hole that it fits into. Their arm is that way and their leg is that way. There's a ball and socket, a ball and a hole. We also have balls and sockets in our body. We have them in two places, in our shoulder and in our hip, okay? We have a ball and socket that allows us to move our upper arm and our upper leg in a circular direction. These are the most movable joints. You can move them in a circular way, and they allow a lot of movement. So again, you have them in your shoulder and in your hip to allow you to move your upper and lower legs in a circular way. So, for example, we use our balls and sockets like if we're rowing a boat, okay? To row a boat, you would need to use your ball and socket in your upper arm. Or for the ballerina to do all these amazing movements, she would also need to use her ball and socket joints in her leg and the arm as well. And also when you're like dancing around and so on, you use your balls and sockets a lot. Okay, they are very movable joints and they allow you to move in a circular direction. Now the fourth kind of movable joint, they didn't mention this in our book, but I want to add it because I think it's interesting to know. They are the gliding joints. They only move a little bit and they allow kind of like a sliding movement. You have them in your backbone, Gliding joints allow you to bend your back, so every vertebra can bend a little bit because of the gliding joints that slide. And you also have them in your fingers and toes. You have tiny gliding joints that allow you to bend your fingers and toes and your backbone. So gliding joints, they move a little, okay? They're the opposite of balls and sockets, which move a lot. So when you're wiggling your toes or wiggling your fingers or bending down, bending your vertebra to pick something up, you're using your gliding joints. Now this is a video about the skeletal system. I hope you guys enjoyed the lesson.
In this module, you will learn about body movements and joints. You do different exercises in your yoga classes at school. For doing these exercises, you do different types of movements. For example, moving your arms and legs, forward bending, shoulder rotation, and many more. You can do these movements easily because your body is flexible. Such flexibility in our body is due to the presence of joints. Do you know what a joint is? Well, a joint is actually a place where two bones are joined together. Press your hand against your knee, shoulder, or your fingers. You can feel your joints there. Not all joints allow movements. On the basis of whether the joint helps in the movement or not, these joints can be categorized into two types: immovable and movable. The immovable joints are the joints that allow no movement of the body parts. These are also called fixed joints. Such joints are found in the skull. Except the joints present in the skull, all other joints found in the body are movable. Movable joints are the joints that help in the movement of the body parts. Movable joints are further of four different types. They are hinge joint, ball and socket joint, pivot joint, and gliding joint. Let us learn about these joints one by one. Let us first learn about the hinge joint. A hinge joint is very similar to a door hinge. You can see that the door hinge allows the opening and closing of the door in two directions. Similarly, a hinge joint in the body also allows the movement in two directions, that is, forward and backward, or upward and downward. The elbow and knee joints are the two examples of the hinge joint. Let us now learn about the ball and socket joint. In the ball and socket joint, the end of one bone acts like a ball. This bone fits into another bone, which acts as a socket. Hence, the joint is called the ball and socket joint. This arrangement allows easy movement of the body parts in all the directions. The hip joint and shoulder joint are the two examples of the ball and socket joint. The next type of joint is the pivot joint. In this type of joint, one of the bones acts like a cylinder and fits into the end of the other bone, which is like a ring. Hence, the first bone rotates inside the ring and allows easy movement of the body part in different directions. An example of a pivot joint is the neck joint. The pivot joint allows the movement of neck sideways, upward, and downward. It even allows the rotation of the neck. The last type of joint is the gliding joint. This type of joint allows the bones to glide over each other and hence allows slight movement of the body parts. In this type of joint, the joint bones are flat and so they slide back and forth and side to side. Ankle joint and wrist joint are some examples of the gliding joint. Now, there is a special tissue that holds the two bones of a joint in position. This is called ligament. There is another soft tissue that covers a joint from outside. This is called cartilage. The bones are not visible from outside. So, in case of an injury, doctors use X-rays to check any damage of our bones. X-rays are the special rays that help to create the image of bones using radiations. Let's recap. A joint is a place where two bones are joined together. Joints can be categorized as movable and immovable joints. The immovable joints or the fixed joints are the joints that allow no movement of the body parts. Movable joints are the joints that help in the movement of the body parts. Hinge joint, ball and socket joint, pivot joint, and gliding joint are the 4 types of movable joints.